Okay, so we are going to discuss today something that pertains to the Yom Tov of Shavuot, to the holiday of Shavuot, but really more I'm going to speak about the period of time between Pesach and Shavuot. Now, generally speaking, well, first of all, before we get into our topic, I want to just point out that in this period of time between Pesach and Shavuot, during what we call the Sphira, the Yemei HaOmer, the days of counting of the Omer, we read Parshas Bechukotai, which is the last parsha in Chumash Vayikra. In that parsha, one of the primary themes of that parsha is that there is no such thing as happenstance. There's no such thing as mikra. There's no such thing as something just happening. That God, with divine providence, orders all the events that befall Am Yisrael with purpose. They just don't happen haphazardly. So now, with that in mind, let us begin. The first question I want to ask is, this period between Pesach and Shavuot should be the happiest period in the Jewish calendar. We have gained our freedom from bondage, 100, 200 years of slavery, backbreaking work, oppression, murdering of children, just a terrible, terrible experience, and we get free. Great miracles, 10 plagues, splitting of the sea, all these great miracles infuse us with joy that we are free. We're now heading towards Matan Torah, and in 49 days after our freedom, we stood at the foot of the mountain and we received the Torah, which is our purpose in life, to study and to fulfill the commandments of the Torah. This should have been the happiest period of our time. It marks us as a people, free and subservient to the Torah. And yet, the students of Rabbi Akiva die in this period, 24,000 of them, and as a result, the period is plunged into gloom, into mourning. We mourn the loss of these students. Why do we mourn their loss? Because you can just imagine if Rabbi Akiva left over 5 main students who turned the world on its head by introducing us to the oral law, the Mishnah and the Talmud. Rabbi Akiva is the father of the Mishnah. His students, the 5 students that he left behind, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Lazar, and all these great Talmidei Chachamim, these Tanoim, were the fathers of the Mishnah, which was a precursor to the Talmud, and therefore the whole Torah Sheba'al Peh is what we call the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the Mishnah and the Talmud, that was brought to us through the great teachings of Rabbi Akiva. If so, we can imagine what more would have been produced if we would have had 24,000 more students, maybe not of the same stature, but of close to the same stature as the 5 that did survive. So the question is, why does God rain on his party? He created these events, Yetzias Mitzrayim, and Matan Torah, and the giving of the Torah, and then all of a sudden, instead of enabling us to celebrate this in happiness, we are now plunged into the days of the Sphira, which we call the days of the Sphira, which are marked by mourning for the loss of the students of Rabbi Akiva. So that's the first question. The second question is, isn't it ironic that we stop the period of mourning to celebrate the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was another one of the foremost Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva? So here we are, we're mourning the students that died, and then we stop and we say, stop mourning, let us celebrate the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Is that not ironic? Okay, so that's the second question. The third question I'd like to ask is, most troubling is, what is the reason for the deaths of these 24,000 students? So the Talmud tells us that they all died in one period, this period between between Pesach and Shavuot, And they all died because Shelo Nogu Kovod Zeh B'Zeh. They did not accord proper respect or honor one to the other. Okay? All right. What was Rabbi Akiva's foremost teaching? What did he proclaim to be the Klal Gadol BaTorah, the primary principle of the Torah? V'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha. You should love your fellow as you love yourself. How do you love somebody else as you love yourself? That's a question the Ramban on the Chumash, the parish of the Ramban, Nachmanides raises on the Chumash, and he has a whole explanation. But we won't get into that unless we have so much extra time, which I never do anyway. So the question is, why would they have died? Because they did not give honor one to the other? Didn't they inculcate the main teaching of their Rebbe, love your fellow man as you love yourself? If you love somebody as you love yourself, of course you're going to afford them proper respect and proper honor. So when they did not accord proper respect and honor to their fellow students, they did not practice. And how is that possible? Now we to say, who were the greatest teachers in Israel? Well, the first one would be Moshe Rabbeinu. He was the one who was Malamed Torah La'am Yisrael. He taught the Torah to the people of Israel. So he is the foremost teacher. 600,000 men. Well, 2 million people approximately, and he introduced and taught the Torah to Klal Yisrael, to Am Yisrael. So, fine, he's number one. Who would be number two? Well, I already told you Rabbi Akiva is the father of the Torah Shebaal Peh. But not only that, Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students. Who else had 24,000 students in Jewish history? It must be that Rabbi Akiva is number two. He's the second greatest teacher in Israel. So this adds to our quandary. Here we go with the second most influential and the teacher in Israel, the most profuse and greatest of the teachers of Israel. He taught his primary principle, Ahavta Recha Kamocha, and 24,000 of his students don't grasp his principle and they die. How is this possible? Okay, so that was the third question. The fourth question we will ask is, if you want to search us through the entire 5 books of Moses, the entire Chumash, as we call it, one will notice that the name Yerushalayim as the Ir HaNivchar, the primary city, the capital city, the city where the Akedah took place, the city where the Beis HaMikdash is going to be built, at least from the time of the Chumash on, it's never mentioned. Jerusalem is never mentioned as the holy city, as the place to which all of Israel shall assemble, as to the place where the holy temple should be erected. Nada. Not one word about Yerushalayim. It is never mentioned. How is this possible? That such a primary important concept of Judaism, Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, is not mentioned in the Torah. Matter of fact, you study Tanakh, you study the book of Samuel, you will see that first of all, you'll study the book of Judges. You will see that never does Yehoshua assemble the people to Yerushalayim. When he makes his farewell address, he assembles them in Shechem. When Shmuel HaNavi assembles the people, he assembles them in Mitzpah. Nobody gathers the people for national addresses by the leadership to Yerushalayim. You would think they would gather to Yerushalayim. No, they don't gather to Yerushalayim. The first real emphasis of Yerushalayim pops up when David HaMelech chooses Jerusalem to be his capital city. How does he choose Jerusalem to be his capital city? So if you read the text of the Tanakh, in both Shmuel and in Divrei HaYomim, you will see a major story. What happens there is David HaMelech makes a mistake, and he counts the Jewish people in a wrong manner. We know from the Torah, it says, Ki sisas rosh b'nei Yisrael, when a person, a leader, wants to count the number of the people of Israel, wants to conduct a census, a population census, v'nasnu ish kofer nafsho, everyone has to contribute a half a shekel. And they gather all the half a shekels, they count the half a shekels, and they determine the population. We don't have a head count. We only count by b'matzis hashekel. So some Meforshim understand that David HaMelech's mistake is that he had a population survey, a count, and he didn't do it by Machzis HaShekel, he did it by head. Others say, no, that can't be. It's a pasuk in the Torah. How could have David HaMelech made such a mistake? So they say, what did he do? What was wrong? He counted from 13 and up, and the Torah tells us that the count should be from 20 and up. Okay, there are other answers given to what David HaMelech's mistake was. Another one is that he counted them for his own aggrandizement, to know how many people were in his realm, and not for any military or other national purpose, just for himself, and therefore it was an improper count. Anyway, as a result of this improper count, a plague breaks out and people start dying. God brings a plague upon the children of Israel. And David HaMelech is beside himself. It's his fault, he says to God. Why are you punishing my people, your children, when it's my fault? And he's wandering the streets of Yerushalayim just beside himself in agony. And all of a sudden he sees the Malach B'charbo shalufo biyodo netuya al Yerushalayim. And the sword is drawn in the hands of this angel, the angel of death, hovering over Jerusalem with a drawn sword, and David HaMelech falls to the ground, and he now is screaming out to God. And all of a sudden he feels the hand of the prophet on his shoulder, and Nasan HaNavi tells him, arise, build an altar here and pray to Hashem. He rises, he builds an altar there, he prays to Hashem, and the plague stops. David then says, this is going to be the place where I'm going to erect the Beis HaMikdash. So what happened here? He was wandering the streets in agony and beside himself. He falls to the ground right at this particular spot, and oh, lo and behold, that spot is what he elects on his own volition to build the Beis HaMikdash, which he was stopped from completing or doing, and his son Shlomo completes it, as we learned in Sefer Melachim. However, it seems that he stumbled on this place without any prior intent, and this becomes the place of the Beis HaMikdash, and this becomes his holy city, which David designates as the capital of Israel. So now, why is this missing from the Torah? Why doesn't God ever tell us, hey, children, why don't you just go into the land, and after you conquer it, go to Jerusalem, and there know that this will be the holy place. This is where the Akedah took place. This is where Abraham sacrificed Isaac, or almost sacrificed Isaac. It's not mentioned anywhere in the Torah. It seems to be an haphazard selection of David HaMelech's, and of course we know that there is no happenstance. By the way, in the book of Joshua, in the book of Judges, in Perek Aleph, it tells you, Vayilachamu b'nei Yehuda b'Yerushalayim, the tribes, the sons of the tribes of Yehuda, warred against Jerusalem, captured it, smote it, burnt it to the ground. And they never habitated. They keep going. And this is part of the conquest of the land of Canaan by the Jewish armies. And it's just mentioned in passing that they did burn Jerusalem to the ground, but there's nowhere that it's mentioned that they settled it. Okay. So what is going on here? To resolve these questions, let us go back and reflect a little bit on the life of Rabbi Akiva. So we know that for the first 40 years of his life, he was unschooled, untutored, ignorant, and certainly in the ways of the Torah. And the Midrash tells us that he finally becomes immersed in Torah, but first he has to learn the Aleph Beis. So ignorant was he was illiterate. He couldn't read Hebrew. He didn't know the Aleph Beis. And that's what's happened during the first 40 years of his life. What turned him around? So one day, he saw the daughter of Kalba Savua, one of the three richest men in Jerusalem. And she obviously had a lot of charisma, if not beauty, or not both. And he fell in love with her, love at first sight. And he approached her and he said, will you marry me? And she says, oh, well, I cannot marry you. You're totally ignorant. If you go off to yeshiva and you study Torah, I will marry you. And so he does. He goes off to yeshiva, and the rest is history. After 12 years of study, he returns home, and he has 12,000 students in his wake. And before he even reaches his door, he overhears his wife talking to a neighbor, and she says, she knew he was on his way home. She said, oh, if only my husband would spend another 12 years studying, I would be happy. So he turns around and he goes back and he studies in the yeshiva for another 12 years. Now, as far as I'm concerned, and this might be a little bit of a deviant shot, it's not that he never came home. Of course he came home. What do you think? He was so insensitive that he never came home? Not for Rosh Hashanah, not for any of the Chagim. He never came home. He had children. What does it mean he never came home? It means he never came home with the intent of staying home. Whenever he came home, it was transient. It was a visit. He always intended to go back to yeshiva. And until the end of the 24 years, he did not come home to settle at home, to live with his wife on a permanent basis. So anyway, he comes back after 24 years with 24,000 students now. If this is an exaggeration, maybe it is, but whatever is said and done, he came back with a lot of students. And his wife Rachel went out to greet him. And when she approached Rabbi Akiva, the students wanted to push her away. What's this woman coming here? Probably they were Haredi. What is this woman coming up to Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva says, NACHLAOT, let her come. Shali v'shalach shalahi. Everything that I am, all the studiousness of me, all the knowledge of Torah that I amassed, and all that you know from me is because of her. And so she went up and sat with Rabbi Akiva. Kalba Savua saw this, he blew his mind. He said, I didn't have any idea that Rabbi Akiva had such potential, and he sought to negate his oath of disinheriting his daughter, and the family came together again. But anyway, this is what made Rabbi Akiva so powerful of a Talmid Chacham. He did it initially out of love for his wife. So Rabbi Akiva understood clearly the power of love. For after all, before Rabbi Akiva went off to yeshiva, the Gemara tells us that he held the Talmidei Chachamim in such disregard that he said about himself, Mi yitain li Talmid Chacham v'anashchena kechamor bar. If only I was presented with, means if only I met up with a Talmid Chacham, I would bite him like a wild donkey. Mm-hmm. What kind of talk is that? He didn't know the man. He just didn't know him. He was so angry at the Talmidei Chachamim that he was willing to attack an unknown person for no reason, merely for the fact that he was a Talmid Chacham. So now you can understand there was a massive transformation in the outlook of Rabbi Akiva, from being a hater of Talmidei Chachamim to becoming one of the greatest, if not the greatest Talmid Chacham of his generation. And this was all brought about by love. Now, we know that the second temple was destroyed because of sinas chinam, because of senseless hatred of one Jew to the other. How do we know this? It's not in the Tanakh, because the second temple was destroyed hundreds of years after the Tanakh was closed. So how do we know this? There was no Navi, divine revelation ceased. Who's telling us that the generation was guilty of senseless hatred? Who made that assessment? The answer is the great scholars of that generation, the Talmidei Chachamim, the Tanoim of that generation, surveyed their generation and realized that it was steeped in selfless hatred, and therefore they pronounced this to be a grievous sin which caused the destruction of the second temple. Now, Rabbi Akiva was one of the great students and great Tanoim in that very period. He had already studied for 12 years. He had already had 12,000 students. He was already a great scholar. He participated in that assessment as one of the leading scholars of his generation. So he said the generation is guilty of sinas chinam, senseless hatred. We know from our tradition, and the Rambam puts this in his great code, that Rabbi Akiva was Hu Hayon Nosei Kelov Shel Bar Koziba. Rabbi Akiva was the mentor. Actually, it says he was the arms bearer. It doesn't mean he went off to war. It meant he was the spiritual mentor of Bar Kochba, who was first called Bar Koziba, the son of Koziba. And Rabbi Akiva changed his name to Bar Kochba because the pasuk says, Dorach Kochav Meyakov, a star will shoot out from Jacob, meaning from amongst the people of Israel. And Rabbi Akiva thought that Bar Kochba was Mashiach, and therefore he said, Dorach Kochav Meyakov, his name should be Bar Kochba. And he was the Nosei Kelov, the spiritual mentor of the revolt against the Romans that took place around 130 so AD. The temple fell in 69-70 AD, so 60 years later, Rabbi Akiva was promoting Bar Kochba as the Mashiach. Well, one of the conditions of Mashiach is that he will build the temple, the third temple. Now, how could Rabbi Akiva believe that Bar Kochba is Mashiach, which requires him to build the third temple, in an atmosphere of senseless hatred which caused the destruction of the second temple? Therefore, Rabbi Akiva taught through his 24,000 students, overcome your senseless hatred by adopting my principle, the Torah's principle. Love your fellow man as you love yourself. With that in mind, with his students dispersed throughout the realm, teaching his cardinal principle, he thought that he had changed the atmosphere of Klal Yisrael. Yes?
The story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa is in the same period.
It's a little bit before the destruction of the second temple.
Yeah.
In the same period. Rabbi Akiva was alive already at that time.
And he was present.
I don't know if he was there at the time. He was busy studying in yeshiva. He wasn't at a party, at a banquet, or whatever it was. But anyway, there were other great Talmidei Chachamim at that meal.
How can he be around the time of Bar Kochba 60 years after?
He lived to 120.
Rabbi Akiva?
Rabbi Akiva lived to 120. Another parallel between Rabbi Akiva and Moshe Rabbeinu. They both lived to 120. Moshe Rabbeinu died in the Shika, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, kissed him. He died a pleasant, comfortable death. Rabbi Akiva died by being tortured to death by the Romans. So, although they had a parallel of 120 years, their deaths were very markedly different. Anyway, now we get to the point. Rabbi Akiva is teaching, V'ahavta Re'echa Kamocha. His 24,000 students are teaching this throughout. He thought it was accepted by the people, and therefore he thought, with that in mind, I can mentor Bar Kochba, support him to be the Mashiach, because our generation has now overcome senseless hatred through the teaching of V'ahavta L'Re'echa Kamocha. Okay, so now we begin to understand what is going on here. Rabbi Akiva, aware of what love is, spreading love amongst Jews, and yet his students don't reach this pinnacle, don't understand, don't integrate this message. We asked, how is it possible that the second greatest teacher in Israel should fail to deliver over to his students his primary principle, the Klal Gadol B'Torah? So, we can understand this maybe by looking at what happens in our own time and drawing maybe a parallel. You know, my generation at least, lived through the great Six-Day War, the great miracles of the Six-Day War. It blew us away. You know, if you were mamish aware of what happened in the Six-Day War, you could not imagine anything greater, no greater miracle since the days of the Torah itself. What happened? The Arabs and Nasser, cut off the Straits of Tiran, and anyway, Israel decided that was an act of war. The armies were arrayed against each other. Everyone was posed for who's going to shoot first, and thousands of graves were being dug in the nation of Israel, in the state of Israel, because we thought it was going to be one heck of a bloody war, and that we were going to suffer many, many, many casualties, God forbid, and therefore, in preparation for that, the graves were opened. Thousands of graves were opened. Lo and behold, on the third day of the war, the Israeli Air Force destroys the entire Egyptian Air Force in a blitz attack that was undetected. And because of that, Israel won the Six-Day War in glorious and rapid fashion. Without an air force to block us, we swamped their armies, we conquered them, we chased them all the way across the Suez Canal, we took the Sinai Peninsula. But we took more than just that terrain. We took the old city of Yerushalayim. We took the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. We took Kever Rochel. We took Bikat HaYarden. We took Ramat HaGolan. We took all of this in 6 days. Unbelievable. Mamash like a war in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu or Yoshua ben Nun. I just want to make an aside here. I daven in a Beis Medrash where the primary core is Haredim, 6 or so generations of Yerushalmis, with the whole garb and the whole 9 yards. And one day, one of these not elderly, but someone in his close to 60s comes up to me, and I don't daven there on Yom Yerushalayim or Yom Ha'atzmaut because they say Tachnun, and I blow them away by I say, you're ridiculous for saying Tachnun. You really should be saying Hallel, but somehow they respect me. I don't know why, but so they let me get away with attacking them. And but I don't daven there on those days, and they know why. And so one day, one of the Shalmi come up to me and he says, "What happened on Yom Yerushalayim?" Did I tell you this already? I say to him, "What do you mean what happened in Yom Yerushalayim? Don't you know what happened in Yom Yerushalayim?" And I went through everything: the war, the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, the Kowalsky, all of these things were captured. What I enumerated before, all taken in 6. And he says to me, "Well, how long did that take?" I said, "It took 6 days. Lo shamata mimilchemet sheshet hayamim. You never heard of the war of 6-day war?" He says, "Yeah, I was like 10 years old or so when this all happened. I heard about a war, but I lived in Meir Sha'arim. They didn't tell us anything about what happened. No war, nothing. We knew there was a war, and we knew of some that the Medina won. The Trefa and Medina won. But we never knew that all this was captured in a mere 6 days." I said, "Yeah, that's what happened." He says, "Oh, maybe I should reconsider what I do on Yom Yerushalayim." Of course, he never did. But the point is, they don't even know what happened. They are so cut off from Jewish history, from the Tanakh, from what's going on outside of their narrow geographic area. They are oblivious to the Yad Hashem, to God's unbelievable hand, to all of the nisim that happened. They don't even know. So I said to my wife, now I understand why they don't celebrate. Chag Sameach.
Yeah.
Now I understand they don't know. But anyway, back to our story. So now, this period of time that was Musugal, which was set aside for unifying the people. Because what happens in the 49 days between Pesach and Shavuot? What does Moshe Rabbeinu do in those 49 days to prepare the nation of Israel to be makabel, to accept the Torah? There's no mitzvos or Torah to teach them because it wasn't yet given. What is he going to do to prepare the nation? What is he going to do? Shackle? I mean, what do they do? What do they do? The answer is Moshe Rabbeinu had to meld that rabble that came out of Egypt, disjointed, disunified, and he had to mold them into a nation. He had to mold them into a nation that would have a national consensus to say, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. We will accept the Torah unconditionally. This was not a simple feat. This does not happen overnight. This took Moshe Rabbeinu, the great Moshe Rabbeinu, 49 days to meld the people into a nation so that there could be a unanimous proclamation that we will accept the Torah. It wasn't the majority. There was no minority report. Vayichan Shom Yisrael Keneged Ahor, and the Jewish people encamped at the foot of the mountain, Rashi tells us, it says, Vayichan b'loshen yochid, ki ish echad b'lev echad. Like one man with one heart. There was a national consensus, a unanimous consensus to accept the Torah. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu did in those 49 days. Therefore, as we know, whatever events happen in Jewish history don't happen in isolation, don't happen 1 year in the past, but there's a spiral that continues to come around. For instance, this Shavuot, it's not that we accepted the Torah 3,000 years ago. We're accepting it this coming Shavuot. That night that we celebrate Shavuot, we need to each pledge ourselves. We are accepting the Torah and its mitzvahs on us. Pesach, when we sit at the table, the Seder table, Chayav Odom Liros es Atzmo Ki Ilu Hu Yatsa Mitzrayim. We must envision ourselves as if we were there in Egypt, being redeemed. It's not something that happened 3,000 some years ago. It's happening tonight to us as we sit around the table. We are being redeemed. And we are therefore celebrate holidays in a spiral. It starts at this point and it keeps coming back. Back, it comes around. Every year it comes around. So now, this period of time where Moshe Rabbeinu united the people and bound them as one man is a period of unity of the nation. Comes along the students of Rabbi Akiva, and they don't integrate that principle, that cardinal principle of B'ahavta Re'acha Kamocha. They're bickering among themselves, or they're not honoring themselves, whatever that exactly means. We don't know exactly what it means because there's no description of their behavior. We just know that they didn't accord proper respect one to the other. This is an indictment of them at that time of the year when it was supposed to be a period of unity among our people. They did not act as unified people, as one heart. They bickered among themselves or whatever it is. But they went against the spirit of the times. Therefore, they died at that moment. The indictment was upon them at that moment, or that period of time, in those 49 days. They were indicted by their own actions because they did not follow the spiral, the spirit of the times of Achdut Ha'am, of unity of the people. That's why they died in that particular period. We asked, why didn't they die some other time? Why did God rain on his party? The point is, God didn't rain on his party. We destroyed the spirit of the times. We, I meaning the students of Rabbi Akiva. We today are falling prey to the same problem when we see our country racked and ripped apart by arguments and fights and demonstrations and counter-demonstrations and even violence one against the other. We understand that we are going, or we should understand, we are going and flying in the face of the spirit of the times. This is a time for unity and not a time for splintering. And that's what happened to Rabbi Akiva's students. And that's why...
When you say spirit of the times, you mean time of the year? Or?
Time of the year. Okay. So, now we begin to understand. But we need to understand one thing. Let's try and understand the students of Rabbi Akiva. Why, again, did they not understand his cardinal principle? I think the answer is they did understand his cardinal principle. The problem was like this. Did any of you ever walk into a Beis Midrash where there's chavrusa sitting and studying?
Yeah.
You ever hear them say, oh, come on, don't tell me that. That is the most ridiculous analysis of this Gemara that I have ever heard. Oh, no, you're stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. It's a very good explanation. No, you're wrong, and they argue with each other. It's called Milchamta Shel Torah, the war of Torah study. And the Gemara says that when they argue, they should argue like enemies, but when the day's over, when they're about to go home and they close their books, then they have to unite in peace. So what happens here? They understood from the war of Torah that we can speak, not so respectfully, a little bit even harshly, one student to the other. After all, we know each other. We don't really mean what we say. If I thought you were, my study partner was stupid, I wouldn't learn with them altogether. I wouldn't study with him. I don't really think he's stupid. I just think, in order to be emphatic, in order to maybe disabuse him of his rationale, I want to be sharply in focus, and I want to show him how wrong I think he is, so I speak harshly. walks in a Baal Tshuva. Do you think they're going to call a Baal Tshuva stupid? Do you think they're going to say to the Baal Tshuva, that is the most ridiculous thing I ever heard, if he asks them a question? Do you think if he disagrees with their opinion, they're going to say to him, you are completely stupid? Do you think they're going to say that to a Baal Tshuva? No way. With a Baal Tshuva, they are totally respectful. They don't want to create a Chilul Hashem. They don't want him to get upset and take umbrage and then walk away. They want to be Makarif him. They want to draw him or her close. So what is Rabbi Akiva's students? What was their tafkid? To spread the notion of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha among the masses who were steeped in senseless hatred. They had a massive kiruv program, reaching out to unaffiliated, to the unschooled. As a result, amongst themselves, they took themselves for granted. But when the Baal Tshuva, when it's a Baal Tshuva, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. But when it's your own study partner, you can speak sharply to him because he understands. He knows you don't really mean it. He knows this. That is the element of disrespect that crept into their rhetoric, and as a result, they were not noyeg kavod zeh b'zeh, and that was an indictment for them, and therefore they died. But of course, the students of Rabbi Akiva did not totally ignore his cardinal principle. They used it in their outreach program. Okay. Now, but on another level, let's take a look at what happens to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, we said before, isn't it ironic that we are celebrating his death when we're mourning the death of his peers, fellow students of Rabbi Akiva? Isn't it a little bit strange? So the answer to this could be that the students of Rabbi Akiva never reach their potential. They die nameless. They leave over no legacy. Not in study, not in students. We don't hear of the students of those students. We don't hear anything about them. They are lost to Jewish history, swallowed up in the gap of time that passed since their death. Nothing remains to us from them other than the lesson of their death. Now, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, on the other hand, left a glorious legacy. He was forced to flee from the Romans because of a statement he made, and the Romans were hunting him to put him to death. And he hid in a cave in Pekiah for 13 years with his son, Rabbi Elazar. They went into the cave and they hid. They stayed in the cave and studied for 13 years. They emerged from the cave, and so consumed were they by the fire of Torah that they were not able to reconcile with people who they saw plowing and harvesting and cutting and trimming and doing all these melechas, all these avodas, all this work that is required to produce bread and food. And so they burnt them up with their stare. They had such a harsh stare, a fiery stare of their kedusha that emanated from them that the people died. Hashem tells them in a heavenly voice, go back into the cave. You're not fit or not able and not ready to rejoin society. So they go back into the cave and they study again for another whole year. Finally they emerge, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai resurrects the dead that were killed by his son's fiery stare. And he says, the world of Judaism, Am Yisrael, is comprised of many, many elements. There are people who will study completely and totally. There are people who will serve in the army. There are people who will serve in the agricultural endeavor. There will be businessmen. There will be tradesmen. There will be, taxi drivers. There will be all kinds of people that make up the nation of Israel. We are all one. And where we have strength in one area, we may be weak in another area. And where the others who are weak in one area have strength in another area, we must pull together as a nation. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai well learnt the message of his master. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. We must learn to love each other because we are all necessary for the receipt of the Torah. You know, the Torah was not given to the patriarchs. The Torah was not even given to the 12 tribes. The Torah was given to a nation. Because no one person, Even the great Moshe Rabbeinu can keep all 613 mitzvahs. It's impossible. Why? He cannot be a Nazir and a Zav and a Kohen and a Levi and a Yisrael. It's impossible for one person to embody all of those traits or those characteristics, and therefore no one person can keep the whole Torah. It requires a mass. It requires a nation. And therefore, since it required a nation, it can only be given to the people of Israel, and they had to accept it, like I said before, unanimously. That's what happens on Shavuot. So as we approach Shavuot, we need to understand that God wants His children to be united. He is greatly distressed by the fact that we are splintered, that we fight among each other, that we cannot get along with each other. So what does He do to fashion unity in the people? So the first thing He did was Shavuot. He gave us a Torah. For centuries, the Torah was a unifying factor among the people of Israel. You could live in Yemen, you could live in Africa, Northern Africa, you could live in Russia, Australia. You can live in Australia, you can live even in Borough Park. And what will unite us? The Torah was what united us. A Jew could come from the far-flung reaches of the world, and he could have common language with another Jew. They could discuss Torah. Torah unified us. Unfortunately, in our time, the Torah no longer unifies us. Why? Because there are streams of Judaism who profess to accept the Torah, but don't. They profess, and they dance around with the Torah just like we do, and they want to bring it to the wall with their women, just like we have respect for the Torah. They want to respect the Torah. Just like we claim the Torah as being ours, they claim the Torah as being theirs, even though they pervert its meaning, they pervert its explanation. So once upon a time, in my shul in Baltimore, the rabbi was very broad-minded, and we had a young woman who needs a refuah shalema, Esther Basara, the refuah shalema, and she devised a program or initiated a program called The Twain Shall Meet. What was this program? It was a program of the laity of our shul, and we invited laity from a Reform temple, from a Reconstructionist temple, from a conservative temple, from unaffiliated groups, and we made once a month a meeting of all these diverse people, and we discussed issues that were common, shared by the community, the Jewish community, and we tried to fashion some sort of consensus. Really what we were trying to do was to show them that we are not narrow-minded, stilted, people who don't have any broad respect for the community or any broad knowledge. Anyway, that was the purpose. One time, the program director decided we would invite a Reform rabbi and a conservative rabbi and a Reconstructionist rabbi, and though we didn't bring our own rabbi, I was there, so to speak, as the rabbi. Default. Anyway, in the course of this discussion, what was the theme of the night? What happened at Har Sinai? What happened at Mount Sinai? You know, we, the Orthodox, we believe that God announced the Ten Commandments. We believe that Moshe Rabbeinu went up to the mountain to receive the balance and the rest of the Torah. And for 40 days he studied under the tutelage of God Himself, and he came down with the Torah to give to the Jewish people. So one of the questions I asked them was, what took Moshe Rabbeinu so long up on the mountain if God didn't give the Torah? You don't believe in Torah Messina. You don't believe in the divine origin of the Torah. You believe in the divine origin of the Ten Commandments, but you don't believe in the divine origin of the Torah. So what do you think Moshe Rabbeinu did for 40 days? What is he, on a picnic? You know, what's going on? They could not explain what took 40 days up on the top of a mountain. Okay? So then one of them says to me, well, you don't believe in everything that you see in the Torah. You don't believe in all that gore and that blood and all that sacrifice, the sacrificial rites. You can't believe that that's the will of God. So anyway, I explained to him that the sacrificial rites is really God inviting us in His home, the great temple, to share a meal with Him. What better meal to share than a barbecue? That's why every korban was burnt by fire, because the smell, the reach nichoach. What's the reach nichoach which the Torah talks about? The fragrant smell is the smell of barbecuing meat. And God said to us, my children, I want to share a meal with you. bring wine for Nisa Chayayin, bring water so you'll have a drink, and have the meat of the korban, and I'll sit there on my Oren HaKodesh, which is my chair. The shulchan where the lechem aponim is my bread, my table, and we will share a meal together. Can you understand the significance of this imagery? That's what the korbanot were in Yerushalayim. And then I said to him, can I ask you a question? And he says, sure. I said, well, why do you go and dance around with the Torah? Why do you hold it? Why do you kiss it? Why do you open it? Why do you read from it? It's full of lies. The Torah says God spoke to Moses and told Moshe to tell the children of Israel to observe these mitzvahs. You don't believe it's true. You don't believe the Torah emanates from God. You believe it was handwritten by man. If that's the case, dance around with a telephone book because it has much more truth than the Torah, which is full of lies.
And it's easy to carry.
And yeah, telephone book is fine. And there are some mistakes in the telephone book, but it's 100% more accurate in your viewpoint than the Torah is. I blew him away. He couldn't answer that question. Why are they venerating the Torah scroll? What's this, a historical novel, historical book? I don't know, pick up a copy of the Magna Carta and dance around with it. What is the Torah? So what I'm trying to tell you is, that Torah was once a unifying factor in Klal Yisrael. It drew us all together. Unfortunately today, with this deviant explanations, what does it say? Do not engage in homosexuality? Well, that's passé. The Torah says it's an abomination. Well, it doesn't really mean that. Who knows what it means? But we don't observe it today. Well, we want to have an LBGT, whatever it's called, community. We want to have a gay parade, a gay pride parade. We don't believe in all that. So the Torah has fragmented us. We now have a fight with our fellow Jews over what's the true and profound meaning of the Torah. So the Torah no longer united us. Comes along God and says, my children, I still want you to unite. I want you to find common ground. So what am I going to do? I'm going to pick up the people from the ashes of Auschwitz and I'm going to bring them back to the Holy Land. You may have thought, where is God in Auschwitz? That I turned my face, God, so to speak, turned his face away from us. He wasn't really there in a sense that he wasn't directly involved in helping us. So he said, that was such a shattering, demeaning, destructive experience. I'm going to turn my face back to you. And I'm going to show you that I still love you. I'm going to bring you to the state of Israel, to the land of Israel. I'm going to bring you back to the land of Israel. And then I'm going to enable you to establish a state. Wow. What a turn of events. What a turn of events. I once heard a rabbi in Baltimore say, you know why I'm a Zionist? And he said this in 1996, Rabbi Mitchell Waldberg, he should be well, said, he was an awesome speaker. And he was in a modern Orthodox synagogue, but he was an awesome speaker. Anyway, what he said was as follows. You know why I'm a Zionist? And he had a very heavy Brooklyn accent. You know why I'm a Zionist? I'm a Zionist because 50 years ago, when he was speaking in 1996, the worst thing in the world was to be a Jew. Wherever you were hunted, you were gassed, you were killed, you were enslaved in slave labor, you were chased around the world, you could not find any safe harbor. Wherever you went, you were terrorized and run and hide, and if you weren't captured by the Nazis, you ran for your life. You had no peace, you had nothing. It was the worst thing in the world to be a Jew during that period. Today, he said in 1996, 50 years later, the best thing in the world is to be a Jew. You're in Sarajevo, the state of Israel will come and get you. You're in Entebbe, the state of Israel will come to get you. You are in Croatia, the state of Israel will come to get you. You are in Russia, we will come and get you. Wherever you are in the world, the state of Israel will reach out. And even though it may not be the most powerful nation, it will be the first nation on the scene to take its people and to save them and to bring them to this holy land, and then here give them full rights of citizenship, integrate them into the society. That's why I am a Zionist. Just imagine the turn of events that 50 years made since the establishment of the state. Okay, that was his point. So what united us in the aftermath of this shock, the national shock to our psyche of the Holocaust, was the state of Israel. The return to our people to this land and the establishment of the state. But lo and behold, it was only a short time thereafter that God's plan to unite us was splintered. How many political parties do we have? How many fights do we have over the government, over governance? All these things destroyed the unity that the state, that God sought the state to impose. Now, God's plan was that this would be a religious state. However, so many of the Jews died in the Holocaust. So many of the Orthodox Jews died in the Holocaust. Why did they die in the Holocaust? Only God knows. But one thing for sure, had they listened to the clarion call, say, of Rav Kook or others to come to the land of Israel, they would not have perished in the death camps in Europe. They would have been here. Imagine 1 million or more Torah observant Jews in this country in 1940s. That would have transformed this state into a powerful religious nation. Unfortunately, we didn't hear the call of God, and we didn't come to this land. And ultimately, the Medina was established, but it is splintered and fractured, and we are no longer united by the cause of the Medina or by the accomplishment of the Medina. So what does God do then? He says, my children, I'm trying to draw you together. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll do a war of independence. Wow, in the War of Independence, you ever hear stories? One of the battlegrounds was Meir Shearim, right on the border of Mandelbaum Gate. There was a big fights. There were fights. They were shooting and killings, and they had to fight for their lives. They all fought for the state of Israel. Oh, once it was established, they may not have agreed with it, but when they were under threat of death from enemy fire, they rallied to the cause and fought for the state. And God said, well, that didn't help. I'll do the 6-day war. I'll bring you these awesome miracles in a 6-day war that are unparalleled in military history, unparalleled in Jewish history, and you will then draw together, because you'll have the Kotel, you'll have the Moras HaMachpelah, you'll have Kever Rachel, you'll have Bikat HaYarden, you'll have Ramat HaGolan, you'll have all of these great places. The land will double in size overnight. In the aftermath of the 6-day war, you know what was born? The Baal Tshuva movement. That's how the Baal Tshuva movement got started. That's when Or Sameach was founded. That's when Eshat Torah was founded. That's when all the Kiruv organizations sprouted all over the world, because Jews all over the world were astounded by this victory that was unparalleled and unanticipated. And it gave rise to the Baal Tshuva movement. It says, God, I see, I gave you a great gift, and originally you started to use it in the right direction. Unfortunately, Jerusalem no longer unites us, miracles no longer unite us, and we are fragmented. So as we head toward Shavuot, we need to keep in mind that there was no happenstance, and everything that took place in the Jewish calendar, from Pesach to Shavuot, was caused by God to try and unite His children. And we are deaf, and we are blind to this effort by God, and we need to somehow overcome that blindness and deafness, and we need to focus on what is the spirit of these times, and what does God want from His children? He wants Vayichan Sham Yisrael ki ish echad b'lev echad. He wants us to encamp at the foot of Mount Sinai, meaning at the eve of Shavuos. He wants us to draw together and come together like one person, with one heart, with one mind, with one intent, to be at peace with each other, and to be able to accept the Torah and its mitzvos in an atmosphere of peace, tranquility, and harmony. Thank you for listening, and that's the message of Chag HaShavuot.
Thank you.